Hey everyone, in this video I'll be going over some examples of conditional statements in Python, as well as taking and using user input. So what is a conditional statement? A conditional statement in programming lets you check if some condition is true and then do some action as a result of that. So for example, if I create a conditional statement, I would start with the word if, and then inside of parentheses, I put the thing I want to check if it is true. So just to give a simple example, let's say if 2 is less than 5. So this is a true statement, 2 is less than 5. So I already know that this is going to evaluate to true. And so then I can say, what do I want to happen if that is true? And so to do the next part of the action, we use a colon and then press enter to go to a new line, and you'll notice it automatically indents my next line. Indentation is really important in Python to indicate how code is grouped together for things like conditional statements. So here I have my indentation, so I can say whatever action I want to happen, it will only happen if this condition is true. So let's say I want to print 2 is less than 5. So it will only print this statement if this condition is true. So we can go ahead and run this and see what happens. So it does print this line, 2 is less than 5. Now if I switched the direction of this, if I said instead 2 is greater than 5, and just to make my print statement make sense, maybe I would also want to change this to say greater than 5. But what is being said in this print statement is kind of irrelevant for what we're doing with the if condition. I'm just making it match so that it makes a little bit more sense when you read it out loud. But if 2 is greater than 5, then we would print this print statement out, and let's find out if that happens. So we'll run this, and nothing gets printed out. So that is because this condition is not true. So when we're checking a condition, we will only do what's inside of that if block. And again, the block is determined by the indentation, and it will only do what's in this block if this condition is true. So let me set this back to less than 5. 2 is less than 5. And again, I will update this print statement. Now let's say I want to add some more actions, some more things that will happen in here. So I could add another print statement. And I'll just say some more actions. Now when I run this, it is going to do both print statements. And notice that they are both indented. If I have some more code that I want to do after the conditional statement, so if I want to leave the conditional statement behind and I want to have some other things happen down here, I could add another print statement that says this is outside of the if block. And when I run this, right now, all 3 of these print statements are going to happen. Now, if I switched this back to be 2 is greater than 5, and I run this again, it is going to do this print statement down here because this is not part of the if block. However, both of these 2 print statements are indented, so they are both grouped into the if block, and therefore they do not print because the condition was not met. When you're writing conditional statements and you're checking if some condition is true, it can also be helpful to say something that happens if that condition is not true. And we do that with something called an else. So if I write else and then again I put the colon, now notice there's no condition for the else. I'm not putting anything in parentheses because else means that this condition was not true. So if this condition is true, then I will do what's inside of this if block. If this condition is not true, then I'll do what's in the else block. So here I could do else print the condition was not met. So now if I run this, now since my if is checking if 2 is greater than 5, and we know this is not true, so it's going to come down here to the else, and it's going to print this print statement, which is being printed right here. And then lastly, anything outside of the condition is also being printed, outside of the if block. There's one more thing that we can add into if statements, into conditional statements, is we can add something called elif, which is short for else if, E-L-I-F. You might also hear people pronounce it elif, but this is a shorthand to say else if. And so what this does is, if this condition is not true, but we want to check a second condition. So here we need to use parentheses. We did not need to use parentheses for the else, but we do need to use parentheses for the elif, because this is else this was not true, but some other thing we want to check. So what else might we want to check? Let's check if, so we can obviously we can check things with numbers. We can also check things with letters. So let's say if C is in cat. So what this is doing is it is checking for this letter C. It is checking for it inside of this string. And if it finds it inside of this string, then this if statement is going to be true. So C is inside of cat. So whatever I put in here is going to happen. So I'll put C is in cat. So let's see what happens when I run this. So I am printing this line right here, C is in cat. So that means this elif, this is happening. So this, the first one was false. The second one was true, so we get inside of here. But the else only happens if all of them were false. So this else is not being printed because there was one that came back true inside of here. We can have multiple elifs, so I could add another one down here. And we could do, let's say, 2 is equal to 1 plus 1. And notice that I put the 1 plus 1 in parentheses to make sure that those get added before it is compared to 2. And we use the double equal sign to check if two things are the same. So if 2 is equal to 2 plus 2, then print, 2 is equal to 1 plus 1. 2 equals 1 plus 1. Now what's going to happen here is it is still going to print C is in cat. It will, when you're doing a series of elifs, it will, if the first one it finds that is true, it will do that one, and then it won't do anything else, because this is only going to happen if the previous ones were false. So this one was false, so we skip over this block. This one was true, C is in cat, so we did this one, and then we skip over everything else. But we will still get down here to this one, which is not in the if block. Now, if we switch this back to 2 is less than 5, now the first one is going to be true, and so it's going to print these two lines, and nothing else is going to be printed. If we set this back to 2 is greater than 5, and let's say D is in cat, which is not going to be true. Now we get to this one, which says 2 equals 1 plus 1. So this one is evaluating the true, and the previous ones were false. So this is the path that we go down in this conditional statement. And if I change this to not equals, the exclamation point and the equal sign, this means not equals. So if 2 does not equal 1 plus 1, then we would do whatever is inside of this elif block. However, 2 is equal to 1 plus 1, so this is not going to be true, which means it's going to come down here to the else, and it's going to say this condition was not met. It is still coming down here and printing the thing that is not inside of the if block. And we can, so this is showing a pretty simple example where we actually already know if these things are true or false, but where this starts to get interesting is if you take some user input. So I'm going to get rid of all of this, and I'm going to start by first taking some user input. So the way that we take user input is with this word input and parentheses, and inside of parentheses, if you would like to put a prompt to tell the user what kind of input you are looking for, it will still accept their input even if you don't give a prompt. So for example, if I don't give a prompt, it will still take my input, but right now I'm not doing anything with the input, but notice that it gives me the blinking cursor over here. So I could type something in here, and I am giving my user input. When you press enter, it's done accepting your input and the blinking line goes away. However, I'm not doing anything with this input right now, so it's not very useful. So instead, let's say a thing that we are going to prompt the user for, and then we're going to store it as a variable. So I'm going to say animal is the name of my variable. I'm going to make it a variable called animal, and I'm going to say input. And now I want to give a useful prompt to tell the user what I'm looking for. So inside of here, inside of quotes, I would say, what is your favorite animal? And it's a good idea to use a space so that when it is taking their input, it does not put the text, the cursor right up against the question mark. So now if I run this, now I can see there's a little space before the blinking line. And then here I could type my favorite animal, let's say cat. But again, I'm not using that for anything. So I have stored it as a variable, but I have not used that variable. So let's go ahead and add a conditional statement. So let's say if the animal the user chooses is dog, then we will print dogs are playful. Elif the user input for their favorite animal is cat, we could print cats are cuddly. Now we can add an else. So this will be for all other conditions. So when we are taking user input and we are checking their what they have entered, there's a good chance they're going to enter something that we weren't expecting them to enter. So it's a good idea to always have an else to handle the user entered something that you weren't expecting. So we could print animal and then is a cool choice. So we could say whatever they entered that was not cat or dog, we could just say that that animal is a cool choice. So here I am using the variable in my print statement. And if you watched the previous video about print statements, you know that you can print multiple things separated by commas, and it will print them on the same line. And the default is to separate them by a space when it is printed out. So just to show that in action, if I say my favorite animal is fish, and now the result is it says fish is a cool choice. So that is using whatever they entered as their animal, and then it is printing something about that. If I run this again and I say my favorite animal is dog, then it will say dogs are playful. One interesting and important thing to note is it's really difficult to predict user input, and especially to predict how they are going to enter their input. And so if I enter dog with a capital D, what happened here is it prints dog with a capital D is a cool choice. So it is using the animal that I entered, spelled exactly the way that I entered it using the capital D, but it's coming down here to this else statement, and that's because it is case sensitive when we are comparing strings. And so dog with a capital D is actually not equal to dog with a lowercase d. So if you wanted to accept the user input either way, you can do something called dot lower, and that has an open and closed parentheses. And I'll do it similarly with cat. So I'll do dot lower here as well. And so what this is doing is it's saying whatever input they entered, make it entirely lowercase when comparing it to this. So now if I run this and if I say dog with a capital D, it's going to say dogs are playful, because dog with a capital D and then dot lower, it is going to make that all lowercase and then compare it to dog. We could even, if we wanted to say all caps dog, it is still going to come back with that first condition because it is lowercasing all of the letters before comparing it to this lowercase dog. So that's a useful way to accept different kinds of unexpected input from the user. Another really good thing to do is to let the user know what their choices are. So I could say choose cat or And so this lets the user know. Now I'm putting this just in square brackets. You could do whatever you want to distinguish this from the rest of the question. I'm going to put a space after this as well so that the user input is not pressed up against that bracket there. But now when I run this, now it says choose cat or dog. So if I choose cat, now it's going to say cats are cuddly. So now if I have given them the choices, now I could update my else statement to say that what they typed in for their animal was not an option. So now it says, what is your favorite animal? Choose cat or dog. And now if I type fish, it will say fish was not an option. So this is a good catch-all if you expect a user might be sort of ornery and enter things that you don't want them to enter. And so if they say clock, for example, clock is obviously not an animal. So they might say all kinds of weird things that you don't expect them to say. Cheese is also not an animal. So if you expect that if you give them options and you want to handle if they're going to do something weird that's not part of the choices you have given them, then you can have a catch-all that tells them that that was not one of their choices. Now, one thing that's important with conditional statements is to note that the else always has to be the last one. You can't put an else in the middle in between the if and the elif. So the order that they have to go in is the first one is an if, then as many elifs as you want. You can do multiple elifs. And then lastly is an else. And this is the catch-all for all the other cases. One other thing that you can do with conditional statements is you can have nested conditional statements. So let's say inside of this, elif, so if they have chosen cat, I will say, first I'll still say cats are cuddly, and then I'm going to take another form of input. And let's say I'm going to store this as a variable called color, and I'm going to say this equals user input for what color is your cat. And I may want to give them options again. So I could say choose orange, gray, black, or calico. And there's more choices than this for what colors cats can be, but these are just the choices that I'm going to accept in this case. Alternatively, if you're going to have a bunch of different choices, as long as you are including a catch-all, it's not necessary to give them all of their options, because we could say, for example, so here's my nested conditional statement. So I will say if color dot lower is gray, and maybe I want to check a couple of different conditions here. So another thing that you can do inside of your conditional statements is you can use or to check multiple things. So I could also check if color is gray or color is black, then maybe I want to say black and gray cats leave lots of cat hair. So when you have a black cat or a gray cat, they're going to leave cat hair on everything, and it gets all over the place. And so then we could add another elif here. So then we could say if color dot lower equals, so maybe they're going to say it's a calico cat, which has multiple colors, or color dot lower is striped, so maybe it's a striped cat. So both of these are multicolored cats, and so here we could print multicolored cats are good at camouflage. And then we could have, we could have another elif. So let's say if the color dot lower is orange. And then we could print orange cats are spunky. And then we can have our else. So this is our catch-all for all other cases. And so here we could print the color that they entered. And then cats are fun too. And so now notice an important thing here. So we have two else statements here, but notice the indentation. And so this is where indentation becomes really important in Python. So this indentation here says that all of these, this whole if block is grouped together, and it is inside of this elif. So this elif has another if block inside of it. This is called a nested if block. And this is all only going to happen if we are inside of this case right here. So if we entered dog, which was the first choice, then it prints dogs are playful, and then nothing else happens because we didn't come into this elif, we didn't get cat, and so none of these other conditions will be checked. And obviously we also won't do this else because we already got a true up here, and so we did this one, and then we don't do anything else. So if I come back and I say cat, then it says cats are cuddly, and then what color is your cat? So now I'm going to get into this set of conditions. And so here I could say my cat is black, and it says black and gray cats leave lots of cat hair. So that is doing this one right here. And then none of these other conditions happen. And then also we don't come back to do this one down here because we completed this condition. So as you're adding nested if statements, you can get pretty complex with it. You could add further nested conditions inside of here. One really important thing to keep in mind, though, is if you are going to take input inside of a condition and store that as a variable, you will only have access to this variable if this happens, if we get inside of here and if we create this color variable. So if I add down here at the bottom something outside of my conditional statements, if I say print your cat is, and then the color that they entered. So what's going to happen here is this is only going to work if they chose cat. So if I run this and I choose cat and I say my cat is orange, and I now realize that I have a typo in here, so there was a missing E for this dot lower. I can see in this error message, it tells me that in this line here, so it says there's an error in this line here, and it says has no attribute lower LOWR, so that means I missed my E, and it suggests what I should do to fix it. So this helps me to identify where an error happened, and it does also tell you what line the error happened on. So this was on line 10. So I've corrected that error, and now let's try running it again. And so if I choose cat, and I say what color is your cat, and let's try again with orange, and it says orange cats are spunky, your cat is orange. So it is coming down here and it is printing this correctly because I was able to come in here and respond to these. So I did create this color variable. Now on the other hand, if I entered dog, now what's going to happen is I'm going to get an error, and that's because I did not ever come into this condition and get a color variable. So if you are going to create a variable inside of a conditional statement, it's important that you only use that variable inside of that condition. Otherwise, you will get into this issue where sometimes it will come back with an error. Now, it won't give you an error every single time, because if I were to answer the cat question, then I would have created the color variable. But you don't want something like this to happen where it's going to give you errors sometimes depending on the user input. So you want to be very careful that you are only using your variables inside of the condition where that happened. Now, if I wanted, let's say I wanted to use this later, and so I could check, I could make my color variable up at the top and just set it equal to an empty string. So I could create this variable. I know it's going to be a string, and I could make it as an empty string. And then if I come down here and I end up assigning it a variable, then that's great. But then if I come down here and I want to use my color variable later, so I could check if color. And in Python, if you have a string, it will actually, you don't have to check if it's equal to something in order to use it in a conditional statement. You can actually just check if it is not empty. And so if I just say if color, this is going to be true if this is not an empty string, and it'll be false if it is an empty string. So now if I run this and if I enter dog, so it says dogs are playful, and it doesn't do anything down here because color is an empty string, and so this is false, and so it's not going to do this. On the other hand, if I say cat and I say gray, and now it completes the rest of this this internal conditional statement here, and so it says black and gray cats leave a lot of cat hair, and then it comes down here and color is not empty, so it is returns true, and so then I print out your cat is gray. So that is how you can add a catch to use a variable. If you are going to create or store a variable inside of a conditional statement, you can create it at the top of your code with an empty value for it. So similarly for a number, if I wanted to store a number variable, I could set it equal to 0 by default, and then let's say inside of here, let's say if they say orange, I could add another condition inside of here, and I'll say number equals input, how many orange cats do you have? And so I'm asking them for a number, and then if the number is less than 2, print that's not too many. Otherwise, else, print that's a lot. So if they enter a number that's less than 2, then I'll say that's not too many. If they enter more than 2, then I'll say that's a lot. So now I have a further nested if condition. Now notice there is 2 sets of indentation here for this if. So it's indented once and it's indented twice. So that lets me know that this is inside of this else, this elif, and it's also inside of this elif. So it is twice nested inside. And then lastly down here, and so I just want to show you that similarly to checking if a string is not empty, you can also check if a number is not 0. So if it is 0, it's going to be false, and if it is not 0, it will be true. So then I can say print number orange cats. Wow. So now let's try this out and let's see what happens. So now I'm going to run this, and so I'll say, what's your favorite animal? I'll say cat, and cats are cuddly. What color is your cat? Now if I say orange, orange cats are spunky. How many orange cats do you have? Let's say 4. And so now I've encountered a problem, and so I want to show you, if you want to take numbers as input, there is something you have to do before you can compare it to something else. So we actually have to turn this into a number, an integer. So if we take a number value from the user, we actually have to add in front of it, we have to add int, and then open parenthesis, and then go all the way to the end of that line and a close parenthesis. This tells it that what you are taking from their input you want to use as an integer or a number value. So if you want to take numbers from a user, you would need to do this in order to be able to compare it if you want to see if it's less than or equal to or greater than a different number. So now when we run this, now if I say I choose cat, and what color is your cat? I'll say orange. Orange cats are spunky. How many cats do you have? Let's say 5. And so it says that's a lot. Then it comes down here. So I got this else condition because it was greater than 2. So I come down here to this else condition. So then it skips over these 2 else conditions because these are for the outside conditions. And I already got inside of this one and then inside of orange. So we don't do this else and we don't do this else. But we do come down here, and if color is not an empty string, then we print your cat is color. And then if the number is not 0, then we print the number of cats they have, and we say wow. So if I, just to show another example, so if I come back up here and I say fish, and it says fish was not an option. So that was this else right here. So I never specified, since I started up here with color is an empty string and number is 0, since I never updated those values because I never got inside of that condition, color is still an empty string, so it does not print this line, and number is 0, so it does not print this line. So that's how you can use your variables outside of the conditional statements. The way you have to do it is by creating those variables first and then just updating them when you take the user input, and then you can just check if those values were ever set. So hopefully this example helps you to understand some important things about conditional statements in Python and how to use user input in unique and interesting ways. I hope you enjoyed this video.